Auschwitz-Birkenau, former German Nazi concentration and extermination camp. The largest cemetery final resting place in the world. Over 1 million Jews, over 100,000 of Poles, Sinti, and Roma, and Soviet prisoners of war. This is not an ordinary museum. Also because no other place saves items such as a broken-off toothbrush or an old suitcase. One of the most modern conservation workshops in the world operates in the former outbuildings of the camp. The remains of the death factory. Priceless and cherished evidence of the crime. Often the last sole remain traces of their owners' lives. Jews were brought to Auschwitz in cattle cars. This is how a few survivors remember this trip.
The train stopped. A rail car door opened with a bang. And then, wild cries and screams in German.
Many mothers are hugging their children already dead. People are falling out of rail cars on the rail ramp. Children are falling from hands onto sharp stones, which stab at their heads and faces.
A kid died in the transport, and when the mother got out hugging her dead child and showed the child to assessment, they were laughing. They snatched the child out and played soccer with it as with a ball.
This doll was found on the campgrounds. It must have been brought here by a child. We don't know who that child was, how old it was, what its name was. Maybe it was a little girl. And given the statistics, it is very unlikely that she survived. It is impossible to think or to talk about this without emotion, to feel calm. Straight away, you start to think about your own children. What toy would your child be hugging, terrified and naked, on their way to the certain death in the gas chamber?
More than 200,000 Jewish and 11,000 Roma children were murdered in the gas chambers of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Several thousand Polish, Belarusian, and Ukrainian children were also sent to the camp. Only a few survived. Right in the middle of this realm of violence and death, among the brick barracks of Birkenau, there is a place like no other. Block 16A. Polish, Ukrainian, and Belarusian children, along with pregnant women and mothers with babies, were held there. The children were starved and beaten in the same way the adult prisoners were. This is how they remember this place.
Nights were the worst. The kids were crying, calling their moms in their sleep. They were yelping, groaning. But as time went by, they became silent, since they knew that nobody would come. Nobody would lay his or her hand on their heads, stroke or hug them.
Children had to get up very early for the morning roll calls. They were ordered to recite in German their camp numbers. Also, when their number was called out, they needed to react without any hesitation. Children slept on such bunks, hard, made of planks, without mattresses, without pillows, without their favorite quilts, and alone.
I remember how much I was afraid of a big black dog. jumping and barking while on a leash. I was afraid of large floaty cloak and screams of that SS woman. The kids were frightened and were pushing their way to the roll call.
Pytanie o to, jak można było przeżyć tutaj w Auschwitz.
The question of how it was possible to survive here in Auschwitz in such conditions in this barrack is difficult. And really, even the survivors themselves don't really have the answer. When I talk to former prisoners, they quite often told me that when today they reflect on what they had experienced here, how much hungry and sick they were, how much they missed their parents, they are not able to comprehend how they were able to survive. How these little children, so fragile, so delicate, could survive under such conditions.
Mogły przeżyć.
They were completely unwanted. They waited to die and died alone, without parents and any tenderness. But one day, as in a fairy tale, an extraordinary thing happened. A stranger with different paints came to Block 16A. This is how a girl who lived in this barrack described the situation after the war.
One day I saw a man who had come and started painting something. Looking at the movements of his hands, we tried to guess what picture would be produced. He drew a house. It was to be a school building. There was a tree nearby the building. There was also a drawing of a boy with a satchel.
Te malowidła, właściwie nie wiemy, dlaczego one powstały.
We don't really know why they were created and who ultimately led to it. The prisoners, on the other hand, recall that it was kind of fun to watch the lines being made.
Zastanawiały się, co też takiego
They
powstało.
wondered what was going to arise and turned it into this kind of a guessing game, which for them was undoubtedly a kind of an escape, helping their thoughts run away from the place. A little bit more than 500 children under the age of 15 lived to see the liberation of the camp by the Red Army in January 1945. They left Auschwitz, but Auschwitz never left them.
The horror of camp experiences has remained in my 5-year psyche. Initially, I was unable to behave and to play like other kids who had avoided the camp. I remember having kids kneel with their arms up. Be quiet, because you'll go to the furnace when Mengele comes. Kids were prohibited from crying in a barrack. Those and other mental feelings were suppressed in us by sheer force. And that is why we became mental cripples.
The last traces of the murdered Jewish children are their suitcases, with the names, surnames, and dates of birth written down by their parents.
The Jews were being lied to. They thought they were simply being moved to the east. They packed the things they needed for their new life, clothes and food. They took their most valuable belongings. They knew their belongings would be checked, so they tried to hide them in their clothes and suitcases.
So let us go back to the memories of the survivors.
Alle raus! Alles stehen lassen!
We left our belongings.
I thought that things would go wrong for me because I had forgotten to mark my suitcase, so I might then be given the wrong one.
How will we recognize our belongings? Where will they be stored?
The people are all gone. Only their belongings remained on the ramp. Now, transported on trucks, they will get to Canada. This was what the prisoners called the large camp warehouses, because before the war, Canada was synonymous with prosperity and abundance. Once there, the things were selected. Suitcases were ripped open in search of money and valuables.
After the suitcases were taken from their owners on the railway ramp, they were taken to the camp warehouses. They were stacked in huge piles and carefully inspected for valuable items and money.
We approach conservation here in a special way, unlike a restorer to the conservation of works of art. We do not repair objects to their original state. We do not repair them, we do not renew them, we preserve their conditions in which they were found. We take care of all traces of deformations, traces of use that tell the story of a given person or object. Our conservators preserve even dried up mud and lichens, which testify to the circumstances in which the objects were left.
It was to be a total annihilation. Not only did the Germans want to murder all European Jews, they also wanted to erase all the traces of their crimes. That is why today restorers and museum experts work as if they were true detectives. With the help of the latest technologies, they analyze even the smallest traces of someone's life. When they are not able to discover the identity of the suitcase owner, they analyze the hotel stickers on the luggage to reconstruct where the person traveled. So who were they? Let's take a look at one of the 3,800 suitcases that have survived to this day.
This is another example of a suitcase that we have in our collection department. And this is an example of a suitcase which one would consider as a middle class. In the inside, we have textile lining and a pocket and a clasp, which is leather. Also, the name of the company that made it. On the surface, we have a name and a surname, so Wilma Bass, and the number of the transport, X396.
The suitcases are not silent. They still tell us about their owners. Surprising discoveries continue to occur. Such was the case of an anonymous suitcase, which was on display stacked at the top of other suitcases until a student from Berlin noticed it. As it turned out, the owner was a very famous person.
Else Ure was a recognized writer of books for children and teenagers. Her most famous series of books about the adventures of adolescent girl was extremely popular in Germany among young ladies in 1920s and 30s. Else didn't believe that something bad would threaten her, and even she had a chance to leave from Berlin, she didn't do it. She said, "Nothing could happen to me." On January 6, 1943, she was arrested and a week later she was taken to Auschwitz, where she was murdered in the gas chamber.
Elsa Ure left behind a suitcase with a number of books for children that ended up in Canada's warehouses. There, however, another fairy tale story begins.
A long time ago, as the rumor spreads in a clearing next to the forest, there lived a lop-eared bunny. His cabin was comfortable and dry. The one that he built himself out of bark.
We are not sure when exactly the book brought here by the Jewish deportees was found in one of the camp warehouses, so-called Canada. The book belonged to the child, the Jewish child who was killed in gas chamber. That was the big impact for the prisoners from Bauleitung, to imagine that this book belonged to the baby who was murdered. They started to think about their own children who are so far away in their houses with their families, with their mothers. They wanted to send a sign of their love.
Stanislav Bench missed his son Andrzej. Henryk Czulda had to leave his little 2-year-old Zbyszek behind the barbed wires. Bernard Świerczyna's son, Felician, was born 2 months after his arrest and deportation to Auschwitz.
One of the examples how longing for the family was important is an example of fairy tales for children from Auschwitz, produced here illegally by prisoners themselves. So that was kind of the fight for themselves, that they wanted to publish these illegal fairy tales for their children.
If the Germans discover their intentions, the prisoners will die. But they go to work anyway. They either translate or write fairy tales themselves. Secretly, they make beautiful illustrations. Some work in the Bauleitung, an institution that prepares architectural plans for the camp. Thanks to this, they have access to the materials. The first copy, a so-called matrix, was made on a tracing paper. And because in Bauleitung there was a modern copier named Ozalid, they were able to copy using photosensitive or photographic paper.
Możliwość kopiowania na papierze światłoczułym bądź na papierze fotograficznym.
At least 27 prisoners were involved in the work on the fairy tales. They managed to publish 6 titles. Almost all the copies went either to their children or to children from families living around the camp, who, risking their lives, helped the prisoners. However, the most touching story is the story of a fairy tale for Bernard Świerczyna's son, who was born when Bernard was already in the camp. In unexplained circumstances, he managed to pass the fairy tale to his son outside the camp with the help of a mysterious SS man. We don't know why the German did it. Maybe he was a father himself.
However, Bernard Świerczyna still dreamed of finally seeing Felek up close. There was only one chance, but it was one chance in a million. Świerczyna was responsible for transporting dirty camp cloth to a laundry in Bielsko. By slightly changing the route, the truck could pass the house where his family lived.
And finally, one day a miracle happened. Bernard sees his son Felix walking down the street with his aunt and neighbor. He jumps out of the truck, and for the first time in his life, he hugs a dazed and oblivious to it all child. The SS man had to turn a blind eye to these few seconds of indescribable happiness. Was it the same German who previously brought a dedicated fairy tale to Felix?
Soon Bernard Ćwierćina decided to do an even bolder act. And once again, he needed the laundry track and the help of the SS men.
The last execution in the history of the camp, of the prisoners sentenced for their attempted unsuccessful escape, is about to happen. Among them is Bernard Ćwierćina.
Planned day of the escape, 5 prisoners hid in the truck shortly before leaving the camp. But the truck was stopped and turned back at the checkpoint, and it was sent back under the escort of assessment to Block 11, which was a camp rest.
Let us listen to the memories of an eyewitness to the execution.
The SS man jumped up, pressing upon the drop lever. There was silence. The sentence was carried out.
One can learn from this fairy tale that one whose garment is lined with cowardliness, he will always be wretched and shall live without a name or with a name of oblivion.
Here is to you, Felician, on your mother's birthday, blessed by your father. This is written by my dad, most likely primarily to me. Felician Ćwierćina, son of Bernard Ćwierćina. Thank you very much. Stone, wood, metal, everything material gets destroyed through natural processes. These processes can only be slowed down by years, decades, centuries. There is one item in the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial of such importance that it was placed in a sealed case, filled not with oxygen, but with nitrogen. The object that was the last witness to the death of hundreds of thousands of children, women, and men.
I remember when the door was placed into the display case. It was during the middle of the night. Everyone worked in complete silence. One of the conservators approached me and handed me gloves. He said, "We are about to close. This is the last chance you can touch the door." In my head, there were dozens of images. I saw people being murdered with gas, women, little children, and I took back my hand. I just wasn't able to do it. I will never touch this door again, and I think This is how it should be.
Let us listen to the memories of some miraculously survived prisoners who were forced by the Germans to work in the gas chambers.
When they were extremely jammed into the gas chamber, they became suspicious of something. It was too late for self-defense or fighting.
When the chamber was full, the assessment shut the door.
The German supervisor often tormented the victims. While waiting for the SS man who let the gas in, he switched the light on and off to terrify the victims. When the light went out, there was a peculiar sound in the chamber, as if people were choking with fear, realizing they were going to die. When it went on, they seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, perhaps believing that the action had been called off.
Drzwi drewniane, specjalnie wzmocnione,
Wooden door with specially reinforced metal fittings, on which the metal clamps visible here were mounted. Then the door was screwed down in order to make it airtight, so that the gas wouldn't leak outside, and in order to make it impossible for the victims to force the door open.
They were screaming, but who was supposed to listen to them? The gas had already been thrown in.
People were scratching the walls with their nails. There were nail marks all over the walls.
Instinctively, they ran up to the door. Initially, a knocking could be heard.
It might have lasted for 10, perhaps 12 minutes. Then, only dead silence.
w tym miejscu, które obecnie jest zaślepione.
In this exact place, which is now sealed off, there used to be a special peephole, a kind of window which made it possible to look inside the gas chamber.
Zajrzenie do wnętrza komory gazowej od strony
The
wewnętrznej.
peephole was fitted on the inside with a metal safety net, so that the victims in their act of despair would simply not break the glass.
Aczkolwiek wiemy z relacji
However, from the accounts of the witnesses, we do know that these windows were very often broken by the victims in their sheer act of despair. And this exact door testifies to it, because this opening, which was located in the middle of the door, is sealed here. To this day, no photos documenting the terrible deaths of children, women, and men inside the chamber have emerged. However, the pictures recreated from memory of a French Jew forced by the Germans to work in the Sonderkommando in a group of prisoners operating the gas chambers and crematoria are a remarkable proof. This photo shows the gas chamber in Crematorium 5 in Birkenau. It's January 26, 1945. 1 o'clock in the morning. a cannonade of the approaching Soviet troops can be heard from the distance. Suddenly, the camp is shaken by a powerful explosion. The SS men blew up the last of the Birkenau gas chambers in order to cover up the traces of the Holocaust. The force of the blast was so powerful that the door was ripped off its hinges. During the Holocaust, they were exactly here or here. The aerial photo of the camp shows 4 chambers and crematoria, marked by the Germans with numbers 5, 4, 3, and 2. In the last one, there is something deep under the rubble that the Germans did not manage to destroy. Something that, apart from the conservators, no one sees and never touches.
In the ruins of the gas chamber number 2, under the ceiling debris, there is a space when the floor of the gas chamber is accessible. It is a unique and extremely demanding place for us, because each time we work here, we are fully aware of the history of this space.
On this floor, crowded to the limit, Jews died in agony. Children, adults, and the elderly. They felt the floor under their feet in the darkness in the last seconds of their lives.
This is also a place where the people don't cry so often as in Auschwitz I. At the entrance, when they see the human hair or children clothes. And in this moment, the people, the visitors, know there is the place where the people lost their lives. And here, they are fully aware of the gravity of the crime.
The Beskids, the picturesque mountains, perfectly visible from the vicinity of Oświęcim. It is from here that the photographs come, which were supposed to be a reminder of happy moments, but instead became a frightening testimony of the heartlessness of the criminals.
We can see a group of young women from the auxiliary service, SS Helferinnen. In Auschwitz, those women work as radiotelegraphists. They are laughing, at ease, gorging themselves on berries from the nearby wood. They are accompanied by a man playing the accordion.
In the next 2 photos, we can see how much laughter was caused by the sudden rain. Zolehite, literally translated, a shelter on the Zola River. The center was located in Porąbka village. The first SS men from Auschwitz had rested here with their families since 1940. We would never have seen how these people, responsible for the murder of thousands of children, women, and men, used to spend their weekends off duty, if it were not for one man.
The album of Karl Hocker came to light relatively late. In 2007, a private donor handed it over to the collection of Holocaust Museum in Washington. This is a commemorative photo album belonging to Karl Hacker, who was the adjutant to the last commandant of the main camp, Richard Baer.
The album contains 116 unique photographs documenting various events in the life of the Auschwitz staff. Visits of Nazi dignitaries, shooting competitions, or the funerals of SS men killed in an Allied air raid.
I'm particularly impressed by a sequence of photographs with SS Soldaten. SS men are clearly at ease, relaxed, chatting, some of them smoking cigarettes. But their presence at Soldaten will also come to an end. From Monday onwards, all those persons will be on duty at Auschwitz. Baer and Kramer will manage the camps. Otto Moll will be in charge of the crematorium, whereas Josef Mengele will perform experiments on kids and selection among the new transports.
After the war, Karl Hacker worked in a German bank. In the 1960s, he was brought to trial in Frankfurt for the crimes committed in Auschwitz. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. After that, he returned to normal life. However, in 1989, he was brought to trial again, this time for his crimes committed in the Majdanek camp. Sentence: 4 years in prison. This criminal has already died at large. He was 88 years old.
Please deliver this letter to the nearest Greek consulate. After a 10-day journey, we arrived at Auschwitz, from where we were transferred to the Birkenau camp. And once there, those physically fit and strong were selected. Where? Where? To the crematorium. This is a wish of a man condemned to death by the Germans because I am Jewish. Thank you. Marcel Najari.
What could someone have done while awaiting their own death in Auschwitz-Birkenau? It seems like nothing, like they were completely powerless. Yet these people somehow managed to do something. From our childhood, we remember made-up stories of a shipwreck survivor being trapped on a deserted island. He puts a letter into a bottle, throws it into the ocean, and hopes that someone will find it. The Jews sentenced to death in Auschwitz did that in reality. And what is even more extraordinary, after years, their messages got to the addressees, to us.
After the war, the huge area of Birkenau, the largest death camp in the world, was overgrown with grass and bushes. The area is regularly cleared by students of the Forestry Technical School in Brünneck. It's October 24th, 1980. In the vicinity of the ruins of the gas chamber and the crematorium number 3, at a depth of about 30 centimeters, one of the students finds a leather briefcase. Inside, there is a glass thermos flask.
Near the ruins of the gas chamber number 3, a glass thermos was found. It was found broken. The water that got inside in the past destroyed its priceless content.
Inside there were 6 double-sided pages written in fine print. All of them torn out from the notebook and carefully placed to the thermos.
Since this object was found in the immediate vicinity of the former crematory, we can assume that those notes were written by a Sonderkommando prisoner.
Sonderkommando.
Sonderkommando, a word that denotes a group for special works. Who were the prisoners of the Sonderkommando? Young men, mainly Jews, selected from among the newly arrived transports, who, under the threat of immediate death, were forced to operate the facilities of the death camp. First of all, for burning down the bodies of the murdered. People who were isolated from other prisoners of the camp. They knew they would die, that the SS would never let them out of their clutches.
It is a big building with a massive chimney stack with 15 crematorium ovens. There are 2 large, spacious underground chambers under the garden. One is used for undressing. Most had no idea about their fate. Some laughed, others cried. They were told that they are about to take a shower, so they helplessly walked to their deaths. To death, my beloved ones. Then I would close the hermetic door.
Being at the very bottom of hell, these people still manage to find their humanity. They want to leave a trace of themselves. So since 1943, they have been planning to leave behind a legacy of evidence of the crimes. Notes describing the events of the crematoria. Farewell letters for their families.
Listy pożegnalne dla swoich rodzin.
In 1980, it was discovered that the author of the notes was a Greek Jew, soldier, and partisan, Marcel Nachari. But most of his text, which is a priceless eyewitness account of the unimaginable crime of the Holocaust, seemed to be lost forever.
The difficulty in reading those notes was that they were double-sided. The ink penetrated the paper, and what was written on one side was visible on other, and vice versa.
However, after another 30 years, there was a shadow of hope that reading the blurry spots would be possible, all thanks to a unique technology, multispectral imaging, which allows you to see more details and shades.
Using this system, changing the wavelengths from ultraviolet through visible to infrared, I record 12 images, which are then form a base for further analysis and further research, which should allow us to see something more than with our naked eye or with the standard photographic equipment.
Almost 6 years of painstaking research and analysis, the most modern optical equipment, the fight for every word and letter. And finally, the effect exceeded all expectations. After nearly 75 years, scientists have miraculously published the complete text by Marcel Nachari.
My beloved, when you read about the work I do, you will ask how I was able to burn my fellow believers. And at the beginning, I also thought many times about entering the oven with them and ending my life. But I was always held back by the desire for revenge. I wanted, and I still want to live in order to avenge the death of Dad, Mom, and my little sister Nellie. I am not afraid of death. Is it even possible to be afraid after all I have seen?
Marcel Nachari survived being in the camp, which is a miracle too. After the war, he returned to Greece, he started his own family, and later he moved to the United States. He named his daughter Nelly, the same name his little beloved sister, who was murdered in a gas chamber in Birkenau, had. He himself died in 1971. During his life, he was unable to fulfill one of his resolutions: to avenge his mother, his father, and his beloved sister.
Can one deceive such a horrific system of evil? You can, but you need a plan. Here is a license plate of the SS car, seemingly just a piece of sheet metal. But in the time of the extermination, such an object gives 4 men a chance to escape their death.
It was one of the most spectacular escapes in the history of Auschwitz, although it's hard to be ranking them. If someone in Hollywood wrote a script like that, the producer would throw them out the door and say that there is no way anybody would ever believe this story.
Here are the main characters. Kazimierz Piechowski, age 24. A scout prior to the war, noble and tough, never afraid of taking risk. Stanislav Yasta, 21. Also a scout, avid sailor, 2 meters tall, very broad in his shoulders. Yusef Lempart, 26. A priest. He agreed to escape without any hesitation, always able to keep a cool head in the worst situations. And this is the 1939 Steyr 220, a beautiful Austrian convertible that was driven during the breakaway by Eugeniusz Bandera, age 42, number 8502. Strong, swarthy complexion, and hellishly brave. A car mechanic unmatched in his profession. He repaired cars on which helpless German mechanics long gave up.
Everything began here in the camp garage, and from Eugeniusz Bandera receiving a warning that he's lined up to be murdered soon. He decides to risk everything and attempt to escape. His plan is to steal an SS car and drive out. He can't do this alone, so he gets Kazimierz Piechowski in on his plan. They want to steal SS uniforms, and they form a fictional commando, Rollwagen Commando, a group of 4 prisoners that pulled a wagon that was used for the transport of materials and garbage. That's how a group of 4 escapees was formed. Finally, they are ready. But can one truly be ready for something like this?
Let's experience this audacious escape, together with one of the daredevils. This is the account of Kazimierz Piechowski. It's June 20, 1942. Saturday. The last moments before the planned escape.
Okay, guys, we'll make it. We shook hands.
Prisoners change into uniforms. They check their weapons. Piechowski is an Untersturmführer, the highest rank, because he is the only one who knows German well enough. Bandera brings the beautiful Austrian Steyr 220 convertible. The do-or-die game begins. They got everything to lose. Let's just cross the gate that separates hell and death from freedom and life.
About 40 meters from the border. We are wearing SS uniforms, have a car with an SS license plate. But they are not raising the barrier. Genek changes down to 3rd gear. Still not raised. One bastard is sitting in a Posten Buddha guard's box. A band thrown into a hand machine gun. Still closed. Genek changes down to 1st gear. We are barely moving. Still 15, perhaps 10 steps to the barrier. On those last meters, I'm no longer in the camp. I'm at my mom's. I'm bidding farewell. At that moment, I feel a hard blow to the nape of my neck. And I hear, Kazik, do something. I cast off my apathy. I'm exposing my arm so that he can see my insignias and screaming, Mach hier auf! Are you sleeping or what? How long should we be waiting here? The assessment has jumped up to the crank and is raising the barrier. We are driving up slowly. The assessment are greeting us, raising their stretched arms. So do I, as if casually. Heil Hitler. We are past the barrier.
Kazimierz Piechowski lived until he was 98 years old. He fascinated the young people, tough, noble, wise and honest. When he told the story of his escape, he often said, on one side there was the SS, armed up till their teeth, a huge system of violence and terror. On the other, 4 prisoners that the Germans took for nothing. That's what was fascinating about him. His escape and his whole life was about one message: never give up.
Auschwitz-Birkenau, former German Nazi concentration and extermination camp. The largest cemetery, final resting place in the world. Over 1 million Jews, over 100,000 of Poles, Sinti and Roma, and Soviet prisoners of war. This is not an ordinary museum. Also because no other place saves items such as a broken-off toothbrush or an old suitcase. One of the most modern conservation workshops in the world operates in the former outbuildings of the camp. The remains of the death factory. Priceless and cherished evidence of the crime. Often the last sole remain traces of their owners' lives. Heaps of glasses, shoes, artificial limbs. There are no graves in this final resting place. The bodies of the murdered were burnt in the crematoria. Almost all that have remained of the victims are things that once belonged to them. Why almost? Because the perpetrators made an exception for those parts of the human body which they considered as goods. These photos show the hair found in the camp just after the liberation.
For the Germans, nothing could be wasted. The camp was not only a huge factory of death, it was also a huge profit-making enterprise. The SS sold hair to German companies at ½ per kilogram, mainly for production of fabrics and felt. 2 tons of hair have survived to this day.
Hair are not ordinary exhibits. After all, these are human remains. Therefore, the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum does not allow filming them. There is, however, one exception. The intertwined locks of a woman and a man that are carefully preserved in the museum collections.
Edward Galiński was deported to Auschwitz in 1940 as a 17-year-old teenager and spent in the camp for years. That was for him, this part of life when the person's character is created and the time of first love, first high feelings.
Mala was born in Poland in a Jewish merchant family, and at the age of 10, she immigrated with her family to Belgium. That is why she mastered many languages and therefore got the position of an interpreter and messenger between SS supervisors and prisoners. From the beginning, Mala and Edek felt sympathy for each other, and later a great love broke out. Once, she was to say to her camp friends, "I love and I am loved."
Edek and Mala decide to escape from the camp. To implement their daring plan, they are helped by none other than SS man Unterscharführer Edvard Lubusch, who is a very special person. He helps various prisoners, and he provided the couple in love with an SS uniform and a pass. She disguises herself as a prisoner, carrying a wash basin over her head, while Edek pretends to be a guard. Polish prisoner Wisław Keller helps them as well, becoming an eyewitness of the escape. It is June 24th, 1944.
A good idea was with this bowl covering almost completely a small head of Mala. But Mala is bending under such a weight. Edek let Mala go forward, and he himself was following her at a few step distance, like an SS man escorting a prisoner. Step by step, they were walking away from the camp.
It was only at the evening roll call that the camp siren wailed, alerting about the escape. The chase began.
Mala and Edek were running to the mountains. After several days, she was arrested, and Edek didn't want to leave her alone. They were put back in the camp in the bunker of the Block 11. Stories in Auschwitz rarely end with a happy ending.
Every evening, when the entire block was plunging into the quiet hours, Edek used to put his mouth into a gap in the door, whistling a beautiful, wistful melody. After a while, the same melody whistled by Mala returned through the tortuous bunker corridors.
Despite the torture, the lovers did not turn anybody of those who helped organize the escape in. Galinsky was held in 6 different cells. There were inscriptions and drawings on the wall devoted to the love for Mala. July 6th, 1944, is probably the last day the lovers were free. However, thanks to the help of one of the prisoners, they managed to meet again in secret. Then they decided that they would not let the Germans take them alive.
The roll call was coming to an end. There was complete silence. One could hear only gravel from under the shoes of Edek, the condemned man, heading for the gallows. Edek breezed up the podium and immediately stood on a stool placed under the gallows. The loop was touching his head. The command sounded.
Achtung!
After a while, one of the SS men came forward, started to read out the sentence written in German. At this very moment, Edek, standing on the stool, found the loophole. He bounced off the stool with his legs and hung. He kept his word. No hangman will get me alive. Yet, the SS man didn't allow such a demonstration. The Lager Capo put his hands around Edek's waist, then put him on the stool and loosened the loop. The German finished reading the sentence. In the time of complete silence, Edek suddenly screamed in a stifled voice.
Long live Poland!
But he didn't finish. The camp remained motionless. A silent crowd of thousands of prisoners became blurred in the nightfall. There was dead silence. The entire camp was paying homage to the deceased.
Most likely on the same day, August 22nd, 1944, but in the women's section of Birkenau, Mala also kept her word. When she stood under the noose, she cut her veins with a smuggled razor. She hit one of the SS men in the face. She was brutally beaten. The dying woman was taken to the crematorium on a wheelbarrow. But how did the lovers' hair survive their deaths? Before the execution, Edek gave locks of hair to one of the prisoners, who then found Vyacheslav Keller.
Edek asked to give this piece of paper to you. Saying this, he gave me this paper folded into a small package. I checked the contents of that small bundle in the block. In the presence of Yankel and the hairdresser. On the paper were written the surnames of Edek and Mali and their camp numbers. And in a folded wrapper, there was a tuft of hair, Edek's short hair and the curl of Mali's golden hair. This time, all three of us burst into tears.
It is 1969. A prisoner of the first transport to Auschwitz, Vyacheslav Keller, number 290, a cinematographer after the war and the author of the best-selling camp memoirs, Annus Mundi, gives the museum in Auschwitz a priceless souvenir. These two logs, the last trace of the life and love of his friends, a Jewish woman and a Pole, were hidden and miraculously kept in 5 other camps until liberation in 1945. The Arbeit macht frei gate. Work makes you free, a noble slogan, the meaning of which the Germans had heartlessly distorted. However, many of the newly arrived prisoners had no idea about it.
No matter how funny it might sound, that gate built up our hopes. There was an inscription, Arbeit macht frei. Thus, labor camp? Well, let it be. Perhaps a factory. Those Germans have such revealing catchwords.
Work makes you free. This slogan greeted prisoners of several German concentration camps, starting with the first one, Dachau, that was established in March 1933.
Arbeit macht frei. It was the title of a short story published by the German librarian, pastor, and writer Lorenz Diefenbach in the 19th century. And the Nazis used this title cynically. In Auschwitz, work kills from early morning till late at night. Prisoners even created ironic rhyme. Arbeit macht frei durch Krematorium Nummer 3. Work will make you free through crematorium number 3.
Annually, over 2 million visitors from all over the world pass under this slogan. do they know that they are not looking at the original one, but only a replica?
The infamous Arbeit macht frei sign was removed from the main gate to the Auschwitz
This was not an
concentration
ordinary theft.
To jest profanacja. Ktoś przychodzi na cmentarz I kradnie.
The most important symbol of Auschwitz and of the Holocaust was stolen.
Przesłuchujemy ludzi, którzy mają
The
informacje.
peace of over 1 million victims of Nazism was disturbed.
The perpetrators remain unknown.
Osoby, które dokonały tego aktu, wiedziały, gdzie idą I po co. Pytanie dlaczego, bo to się nikomu w głowie nie mieści.
On December 18th, 2009, the night was cloudy and moonless. It was snowing heavily. The cameras couldn't pick up anything.
It was still dark, my phone rang. Someone has stolen the inscription Arbeit macht frei. And my first reaction was impossible. You can steal, for example, a Van Gogh painting, but not the inscription from the concentration camp. Who could have done that? And for God's sake, what for?
The symbol of Auschwitz and the Holocaust recovered.
5 men between 20 and 39
Cała
years of
piątka ma w tej chwili przedstawione
Law
zarzuty.
enforcement officers published
The
a video.
reason still remains unknown.
It was only a matter of luck that the inscription was found.
Unfortunately, the inscription is in a sorry state and needs expensive and long restoration.
The thieves were commissioned by a Swedish neo-Nazi. They came for the 5-meter inscription by car. To fit it in, they had to cut it and broke it into 3 pieces. The restorers faced one of the greatest challenges in their professional lives: to restore the world symbol of Auschwitz and the Holocaust to its original state.
The sign was in 3 parts, and all of that 3 parts were deformed. We know exactly that even a small mistake from our side can cause more damage, and it was a really big challenge for us.
The restoration works lasted over a year. They required specialized analyses and masterful skills. Today, the original inscription looks as if nothing had happened, safe in the museum collections. This, however, was not the first time that the inscription was in danger. Here is an extremely rare photo, probably taken in the late fall of 1945 by a former prisoner. One detail is very disturbing. Yes, there is no inscription above the gate.
In January 1945, the Soviet army liberated the camp, and Soviet administration provided help for survivors. However, special requisition troops began to confiscate everything that represented a certain value.
At the same time, Eugeniusz Nosel, a former prisoner of Auschwitz, returned to Oświęcim and got involved in the reconstruction of the city.
Going to pick up building materials on the Bauhof premises, there was a train loaded by the Soviet army. Various machines, lumber, beds, wardrobes, tables. On the side of that railway, there was stuck an emblem, Arbeit macht frei. MacArthur stopped at my request, and I asked, by the way, is there anything to buy back this emblem from the soldier guarding those rail cars, prepared to leave for the East? MacArthur gave him a quarter liter of moonshine vodka. And he had the authentic emblem taken out of the rail car.
Thus, one man saved the symbol of Auschwitz. To this day, it reminds us of the darkest crimes of this place but also of heroic and admirable deeds. Auschwitz-Birkenau is also a story of solidarity and resistance. Let us look again at the Arbeit macht frei inscription. The inscription contains a mistake, and one does not need to know German to detect it. There is a reversed B letter. Coincidence? Or maybe a hidden message? The inscription was made by one of the first Auschwitz prisoners, Jan Liwacz, camp number 1010. He was a master of artistic blacksmithing. The capo, Kurt Müller, drew the inscription on the ground, and the work, under the direction of Liwacz, was conducted by prisoners in the camp's locksmith shop.
First, a bent tube was used to make the inscription frame, and then letters were carved out of a metal sheet. We welded the letters onto the frame. Tendentiously, in this inscription, the letter B was placed the other way around. It's a kind of malice, which gave us a little satisfaction.
There was so little they could do to express their anger at the unimaginable crimes committed in the recesses of the extermination camp. Block of pseudo-medical experiments, closed to visitors on a daily basis.
I was nude, and they laid me on a black table. From the top, I was covered by a white window glass with a light. The light in that operating theater went out. Then an apparatus was introduced into my vagina. I felt a pain resembling birth throes. A small red lamp was on.
Before the operation, I was given several intravaginal injections. They were very painful. After an injection, I had shivering fits lasting as long as up to 12 hours. I realized I had been mutilated for life.
Who was the man capable of such cruelty? And why was he doing it?
Karl Klauberg, before the war, he was a well-known German professor of gynecology. However, that was his initiative to begin with such experiments in order to find a cheap and efficient method for mass sterilization of women.
From 200 to over 400 female prisoners, mostly Jewish women, were kept at this block. Dr. Klauberg injected a caustic chemical into their reproductive organs. They often resulted in death and an autopsy on the very same table. It's large enough for 2 dead bodies. Blood and bodily fluids drained through the opening.
In this block, a historical layout of rooms was preserved, as well as window and door carpentry, wooden and concrete floors, multicolor painting layers. We can talk here about direct touching the history. Each preserved element, piece of camp remains, witnessed a tragic story of a certain person.
It was in this room where Dr. Klauberg performed his cruel procedures. It is a gynecological chair and a set of tools that only a few years ago found their way to the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum.
The instruments used by Dr. Klauberg were found by somebody around the memorial, but the majority of the objects that we receive, even after decades now, are coming from the families of survivors. Those families understand very, very well that those documents will be protected forever here, and they will participate in the history of this remembrance.
The gloomy railway ramp inside the Birkenau camp. The last stop before death for thousands of Jewish children, women, and men. Few will end up in the camp. Most will die in agony in the gas chambers. Everything that happens behind the gates of death is kept in strict secrecy. These are the orders of Commandant Rudolf Hess. And yet the events that took place on the ramp are known today, thanks to about 200 unique photographs. Selection on the ramp is almost mechanical. Children, the elderly, the sick, the handicapped, exhausted from their journey, pregnant women, all go to their death immediately. Dr. Josef Mengele is a symbol of this hell on earth. Known as the Angel of Death, his character became a dark legend. Some even say that while sending the children to the gas, he whistled his favorite tune. The SS men form two columns of people. Those capable of slave labor are sent to the camp. The others are deceived, told that they are going to bathe after their trip. Unaware of anything, the victims go straight to the gas chambers.
The very fact that these photos were taken and preserved to our times seems to be a miracle, but the circumstances of finding them are even more amazing. If it hadn't happened, nobody would have believed it. It was like 1 in a billion.
However, the story of the album's discovery begins not in Auschwitz, but in the German concentration camp of Mittelbau-Dora, 700 kilometers away from it. Soon after the liberation, Lili Jakob, a Jewish woman suffering from typhus, lies in bed in the former SS headquarters.
I had a very high fever. In the evening, I stretched out my hand towards a bedside table and came across an album over there. I was amazed because it hadn't been there before. Next morning, I took the album in hand.
In the photographs, Lili recognizes the faces of her neighbors and loved ones. Auntie with 4 children. Cousin Mendel. Grandma Schendel and Grandpa Abraham. And Lili's 2 brothers, Israel and Zedek. In a split second, the most horrible memories come back. It is May 26, 1944. A transport of 3,500 Jews arrives at the camp. Lili and her family get off at the ramp.
My father was pushed to the right. My brothers disappeared somewhere. I noticed my mother. When the SS man wasn't looking, I ran up to her. The German noticed us. He beat me severely and stabbed my arm with a bayonet. My bleeding was horrible. Then, in the bathhouse, I had my wound dressed, but I was alone.
An additional shock for Lili was the fact that in one of the photographs, she recognized herself right after her camp admission procedure. But let's take a look at another photo from the album, a photo that will become important on a global scale. Lili's two brothers on the ramp in Birkenau. Israel is looking straight into the lens.
When the museum announced a competition for a new logotype of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial, a lot of works arrived. But what dominated in the works were watchtowers, barbed wires, or prisoners' triangles. Director Piotr Cywiński said then, "Wait a minute. After all, what is the most important is not here. There are no people." It was then that he decided to design a new logotype on his own. The eyes of the Jewish boy standing on the ramp in Birkenau became its central part. The eyes of Lili's little brother, who is looking straight into our eyes today.
After the war, for a long time, Lili Jakob could not part with the photographs. It was the last trace of her relatives' lives. But in the 1980s, she donated a priceless album to the Yad Vashem Institute in Jerusalem. In her memories, the ramp always remained the site of the most tragic moments of her life. However, for the Germans, the ramp was only a logistical tool.
What is the point of a factory's operation? It is to produce as fast as possible, as cheap as possible, as efficient as possible. And the same situation we have here in Auschwitz. The Germans need to deport hundreds of thousands of Jews from many European countries, very often distant countries, just to strip them of their belongings and murder them.
This is how the few survivors recall their deportation to Auschwitz.
It was a closed rail car to transport cattle. We were jammed. There was no space to sit down or to lie down.
We were parched. We were packed in more than like sardines. A kid was calling to me, "Water, water."
Crying, shouting, moaning. People were dying.
The train stopped, and the rail cars were unloaded.
Right from the very beginning of the planning of Birkenau camp, the construction of a new transport ramp was planned. At first, this project could not be implemented because of a shortage of building materials. In 1943, the then head of the Auschwitz camp construction department asked his superior, Hans Kammler, for 320 tons of iron necessary for the construction of a new unloading ramp in Birkenau. The problem was that for the whole of 1943, the entire Auschwitz camp received a total of 400 tons, and that in batches of 100 tons. The order was already hard to fulfill. Iron was a strategic raw material at the time and was primarily subject to military quotas. For over 2 years before the ramp inside the Birkenau camp was built, the transports of Jews doomed to extermination stopped at a completely different place. both camps can be seen in the wartime aerial photo. Auschwitz I and Auschwitz II Birkenau. A railway junction and a siding are located between them. What happened in this place haunted the survivors for the rest of their lives.
There were some SS men with dogs and spotlights. They opened the door and greeted us with a beating.
People were surging towards the exit, numbed with fear. Tiny Mordechai was still in my arms, passed out and half dead. In one of those terrible moments, the child slipped out of my arms. I don't know when and how.
I took the hand of Nora, my wife, who was 8 months pregnant. In the other hand, I held my violin. Violent blows made me leave both of them.
Actually, the most of Jewish transports were unloaded here. In the years 1942 up to 1944, the Jews were received in this part of the Auschwitz railway station, which was originally construction material site for the expansion of the Birkenau camp.
However, the path the victims must travel from here is still a problem. The distance between the gas chambers and crematoria number 2 and 3 is about 1 mile. Old, sick, or exhausted people have to be transported by trucks. An unacceptable waste of time and fuel, not to mention the involvement of the SS crew. Therefore, despite the difficulties, a ramp is finally built inside the Birkenau camp. The path to the chambers is shortened to only 500 yards. The Holocaust is gaining momentum. There is a document confirming for certain when the first so-called Sondertransport special transport entered these tracks. It was May 16, 1944 at 1:50 p.m. The ramp was to be expanded. It was supposed to be roofed, and in fact, there are plans from June 1944 showing the intention to build several roofed platforms in the unloading yard. And exactly 30 yards behind my back, there was supposed to be a building for the manager of this railway siding. In just a few weeks, the commissioning of the new ramp coincided with the decision to deport 430,000 Jews from Hungary. It was then that the photographs from the album found by Lili were taken. However, one more question remains. Who took them?
The authors of these photographs were most probably 2 SS men from Auschwitz camp. Chief of Erkennungsdienst, SS Identification Service Bernhard Walter, and his deputy Ernst Hoffmann.
Thanks to detailed analysis of the photos, there is a high probability that the SS men taking them have been identified.
Perhaps it is related to Bernhard Walter. As we know, after the evacuation from Auschwitz, he landed up in Mittelbau-Dora, a German camp, and he may have left the album in the SS quarters.
An additional clue is his name and surname written on the first page of the album. But in the history of Auschwitz, there is another famous photograph taken in the camp. In that photo, one of the prisoners smiles warmly. He's really happy. Margarita Ferrar from Spain, with her son Edie, is waiting for her beloved. It is March 18th, 1944. almost 11 o'clock. From the side of the men's camp, Austrian prisoner Rudolf Friemel is coming. Because of a wedding, he was allowed to grow his hair. He has a tie and a suit instead of a striped uniform. Red roses were embroidered on Rudolf's white shirt by other prisoners. The camp orchestra is playing. Such a scene in the Auschwitz camp? How could this have happened?
We may find it hard to believe, but there was also a civil status registry of KL Auschwitz. It was placed in the barrack belonging to the Politische Abteilung, no longer in existence. The main task of the registry was to issue thousands of death certificates. Such documents had to be drawn up after the death of each prisoner registered in the camp. A single death certificate presented the basic personal data, as well as the date and hour of death, and its cause.
Murdered and tortured prisoners usually had a false cause of death entered. Stroke, pneumonia, kidney inflammation, or sepsis. But for one and only time, the registry office in Auschwitz became a place of love and happiness.
Rudolf Friemel był Austriakiem.
Rudolf Friemel was Austrian. Before 1939, he found himself in Spain, fighting in the Civil War. There, he also met a woman, the beautiful Margarita, whom, after some time, he married. Unfortunately, the Third Reich did not want to recognize this marriage. That is why Rudolf's father asked Heinrich Himmler himself to remarry the young people in Auschwitz. He received the positive news surprisingly quickly. The wedding ceremony is limited to signing the papers in the presence of witnesses. Then the newlyweds and their son go to take a souvenir photo. The SS allows Rudolf and Margarita to spend the night in Block 24. They have to say goodbye in the morning.
In the fall of 1944, the camp resistance movement, Poles and Austrians, organized a daring escape. A group of prisoners was supposed to hide in a car that was taking dirty camp clothes to the laundry in Bielsko.
This escape, though carefully prepared, ends tragically. An SS man, who had been bribed to take the prisoners away, went directly to Block 11 and handed these prisoners over to the Gestapo. He also gave the names of the people who had bribed him. One of them was Rudolf Friemel.
On December 30th, 1944, the last execution took place at the Auschwitz I men's camp. On the gallows, among others, Rudolf Friemel. It all happened on the day when the approaching Red Army was already heard, when liberation was at hand.
But in the archives of the Auschwitz Camp Registry Office, there is one more extraordinary document. It relates to the ramp and Lili Jakob's album.
Some years ago, I looked through the death certificates of kids born in Auschwitz who died there very soon. I suddenly came across the death certificate of Dieter Walter. I knew his very sad name. I looked at the father's data and all was clear. It was Bernhard Walter. Probably the author of these photographs, SS man from the camp garrison, the chief of the SS identification service. His newborn son died a few hours after birth. How come that a man who experienced such a tragedy the death of his own kid, was able to calmly take photos of Jewish kids who were killed in large numbers in gas chambers.
In the history of Auschwitz, there was a prisoner who dared to be German himself in order to get a slice of bread.
A large group of prisoners gathered in front of the camp kitchen. One of them ran up to me and shouted, "Teddy, do you want a slice of bread? Among us there is a German boxer. I'm looking for someone who will fight and beat him." My weight was 42 kilograms, but I decided to fight at once.
It's Sunday, a day off, March 2nd, 1941. The German couple, Walter Dünig, warms up before the fight, a powerfully muscled blonde. He was sent to Auschwitz as a criminal. For fun, he boxes with exhausted prisoners. He has already broken the jaws of 2 of them.
A pre-war middleweight boxing champion in Germany. You can see the broken eyebrows. You can see his crushed nose. Professional boxer.
Opposite, Tadeusz Pizzikowski, Polish political prisoner. Sent to Auschwitz in the first transport in June 1940. Before the war, he boxed under the name Teddy, a great talent, Warsaw champion in bantamweight class. The rivals are both 5 feet 7 inches tall, but a well-fed Dünig weighs 150 pounds. Friends are afraid that Pizzikowski will be beaten to death. German couples are looking forward to bloody entertainment.
Everyone around is crawling. Teddy's gloves are put on. These are ordinary working gloves, additionally stuffed with racks, which were supposed to give the impression of these boxing ones. And from that moment onwards, everything changes.
Dünig simply wants to beat the hell out of Pizzikowski. Before the first blows are thrown, Teddy, following the rules of fair play, extends his gloves in a greeting.
The square becomes a ring. The prisoners standing around suddenly stop laughing. The first round begins.
Dünig attacks furiously, but Teddy is a master of dodging and blocking. The Germans' powerful blows hit either the air or the gloves of prisoner number 77. The first round ends in a draw.
Where does he get his strength from? We don't know. The second round starts. Dünig begins to hit stronger, but Pizzikowski resists this attack and delivers blows by himself. His straight left followed by left side winders. Then an uppercut and the first blood. Blood starts flowing from Dünig's nose. And Pizzikowski does not attack. Dünig throws down his gloves and says, "Guter Junge, a good boy."
Hit the German! Hit the German! Hit the German!
After hearing these shouts, the German capos want to beat the prisoners, but after a while, as if embarrassed, they give up. Dünig gives Pizzikowski half a loaf of bread and a piece of meat. In the camp, this is more valuable than gold.
Since then, Pizzikowski fights dozens of times. Only one fight he loses. he fights above all about being able to share the bread earned from these fights with his campmates. After some time, he is transferred to another camp, where he also fights, and he takes a unique item with him, these boxing gloves.
Dozens of years after the war, one of Pitsakowski's gloves was placed at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial. Here, it is carefully preserved as a sign of the prisoner's relentless spirit and resistance. But how did Teddy get real boxing gloves in the camp?
The answer is the word Canada. Warehouses of things taken from murdered Jews, from where most likely these gloves came from. And those gloves were like a symbol of justice and compensation for all this enormous harm.
Auschwitz-Birkenau, former German Nazi concentration and extermination camp. The largest cemetery final resting place in the world. Over 1 million Jews, over 100,000 of Poles, Sinti, and Roma, and Soviet prisoners of war. This is not an ordinary museum. Also because no other place saves items such as a broken-off toothbrush or an old suitcase. One of the most modern conservation workshops in the world, operates in the former outbuildings of the camp. The remains of the death factory. Priceless and cherished evidence of the crime. Often the last sole remain traces of their owners' lives. A middle-aged man wearing a suit and tie, holding the hand of a boy in a sailor's outfit. Around them, a crowd of elegant people. But they all have the Star of David sewn onto their clothes. They get off the cattle cars in a place that will go down in history as Alte Judenrampe, the old Jewish ramp at the Birkenau camp. Perhaps this is how the story of a man who left behind a unique, one-of-a-kind history of the Holocaust begins.
The sketchbook is the most important artistic work in the collection of the Auschwitz Museum. This is because it is the only preserved collection of drawings showing extermination.
Możemy także przypuszczać, że gdyby
They
autor...
may also assume that if the maker of these drawings survived, he or she would certainly try to contact the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial to find, for example, traces of their family.
swojej rodziny.
We spent hours staring on every little detail on the pages of this sketchbook. We believe that we'll finally find the key to this secret of who was the author of this sketchbook.
The only chance to discover the truth is a detective analysis of even the smallest details of these drawings. So, let's start with the sketch marked with a capital A. Apart from the man and the boy, the author has distinguished one more figure. He has a hat on his head, a bow tie at the neck. Perhaps he is the boy's grandfather. This hypothesis seems to be confirmed by the next drawing. The SS man brutally tugs the child. The boy struggles to get away to his father, but the father stretches out his hands helplessly. He is powerless. The boy will join his grandfather in a moment. a terrible fate awaits them. A sketch showing selection on a ramp is marked with a capital letter B.
This scene is very dramatic, it's very moving, full of emotion. The boy is shouting, and the old man, the grandfather, is standing nearby. So maybe it's the story of the whole family.
Let's pause for a moment at the drawing marked with a capital letter B. In the distance, we see the infamous death gate of Birkenau camp. But the building looks different than nowadays. One wing is missing. Has the mysterious artist not finished the sketch? Or maybe he or she made a mistake? No, it is not a mistake. The second wing of the gate was added on only at the turn of 1943 and 44. So the author of the sketchbook must have arrived at the camp before that time.
The uniqueness of the sketchbook lies also in the fact that it constitutes the only iconographic source showing the old Jewish ramp, the so-called Alte Judenrampe, at the moment of transport arrivals.
Let's pause for a moment at the mysterious markings on some of the sketchbook pages. The artist distinguished them for a very important reason. Card A, the arrival of transports at the camp. B, selection on the ramp. C, unknowing victims go straight to the gas chamber. D, gas chamber and crematorium.
This child is seen on the third sketch in the sketchbook. This little boy in a sailor's uniform, and next to him is the grandfather. A little boy is walking, holding a woman's hand to the gas chamber.
Out of 216,000 Jewish children deported here, only about 8,500 were registered as prisoners. This means that 96% of the children who arrived at the camp had no chance of survival. They did not enter the camp, but were directed straight from the ramp to the gas chambers. The precision with which the anonymous artist sketched the site of the final stage of the Holocaust is extraordinary. The drawing shows one of the two twin gas chambers connected to the crematoria and marked by the Germans with numbers 4 and 5. The chambers and crematoria were opened in the spring of 1943. By comparing this information with the knowledge acquired from the drawing presenting the Gate of Death, we already know that the sketchbook had to have been created in the summer and fall of 1943.
When I look at the sketches, so moving, so full of emotion, so realistic, I ask myself, maybe the author of the sketchbook drew himself, standing on the ramp and holding his child's hand. Maybe he drew the loss of his beloved child. Maybe the author of the sketchbook is that handsome man.
But intuition is not enough to discover the mysterious artist's identity. We have to search for more clues where the sketchbook was found. It's June 1947. After the war, a former prisoner of Auschwitz, Józef Audi, is one of the museum guards. While patrolling the area of the former Birkenau camp, he passes through the section marked by the Germans as B2F. There was a prison hospital here. Today, his daughter Anna is leading us to this special place. She also works at the museum. He noticed a bottle sticking out of the barrack foundations. He wondered what it could be. He went over and removed it, and it turned out that inside the bottle there were some folded and rolled sheets of paper. The hospital from Sector B2F appears in the last but one drawing of the sketchbook. The prisoners throw emaciated corpses onto a wooden cart. But there is one more remarkable clue, that the anonymous illustrator must have stayed there for a long time.
The choice of colors in the sketches, here we have blue and red, is puzzling. We may assume these colors came from the camp hospital. Both red and blue crayons were used to complete the temperature card of patients staying in the hospital.
And the last drawing, it is not finished, and therefore even more moving. If we assume that the author of the sketchbook was a prisoner, then previous drawings suggest that he was sent to the camp hospital. Maybe he was ill and he died. Maybe he was selected by the SS doctors to be sent to the gas chamber.
But there is another hypothesis, a shocking one. The artist distinguished not only prisoners in their drawings. Another group was portrayed with great accuracy as well. In this sketch, we see prisoners taking off their hats at the sight of a high-ranking SS officer. In the details of the uniform, the artist accurately reproduced Oberscharführer markings.
Would a prisoner who was transported to the camp have the awareness and time to draw these elements so precisely? Even assuming that he or she would be assigned to work in various work units, would a prisoner have the opportunity to move around such a large area as Birkenau?
There is one more important detail in this drawing.
The inscription Deutsche Reichsbahn, meaning German railways, is clearly visible. So the author of the sketchbook must have known German very well. He might have been a German Jew, but we also cannot rule out that he was an SS man.
If we accept the hypothesis that the SS man is the author of the sketchbook, why then did he hide the drawings in the hospital barrack foundations?
Also, SS men were forbidden to document camp events, camp life, or anything happening in Birkenau. The fact that the drawings were hidden neither confirms nor disproves the idea that the artist behind the collection of sketches could have been an SS man.
We can't rule out anything, and from this point of view, the sketchbook is a great enigma with 1,000 unknowns.
In the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, there are tens of thousands of items testifying to the Holocaust. Unfortunately, there are also those that perish and bury the memory of the victims forever. The ground at the former Auschwitz II-Birkenau camp is literally saturated with blood and still mixed up with the ashes of the murdered. And it still hides many items belonging to the victims. keys, spoons, medicine packaging. Every now and again, in spring or after heavy rains, they come up to the surface.
When it comes to Brzezinka, there are cases where visitors unknowingly or consciously take parts of some objects from various reasons. Mainly pieces of cutlery, barbed wire, bricks, stones. They take them as a souvenir or to add to private collections.
For this crime, the punishment is up to 10 years in prison. But apart from criminal liability, it has another disastrous effect. For historians, the location where the items are found is of key importance. Even if visitors take an object and return it to the museum, we may lose valuable information irretrievably.
Huge former camps are impossible to oversee in 100%. Therefore, theft is a true plague. Later, when sending such stolen items to the museum, people sometimes wrote in their letters that they had bad dreams or that they felt bad with the item being in their home. Is it true? Maybe. But regardless of their motivations or feelings, nothing changes the fact that they simply robbed the world's largest cemetery.
An aerial photo from summer 1944 shows the German death factory in full swing. The murder of 430,000 people is in progress, Jews from Hungary. You can clearly see the huge column of smoke from the burned bodies. But the history of the Holocaust on an industrial scale begins in a place located by the Germans outside the Birkenau camp.
The place was photographed from an Allied plane flying at an altitude of 8,000 meters. At first glance, it resembles a strange human or animal cell seen under a microscope. But each of these spots is of great importance to the history of the Holocaust.
This inconspicuous place hides a terrifying story. Let us listen to the account of one of the prisoners who miraculously survived.
There is only a thatched peasant's house standing, once plastered white with boarded shutters. And beyond it, a huge smoke column is rising into the sky, spreading the odor of burning human flesh and smoldering hair.
Together with two leading historians studying Auschwitz and the Holocaust for years, we are going there, to the ruins of the Little White House. Look, it is remarkable that Auschwitz is perceived in historical consciousness as a death factory. Gas chamber buildings, crematoria, smoking chimneys. It all started gradually. It all started with relatively makeshift solutions. Initially, the Auschwitz camp occupied only the area of the former military barracks. A small crematorium was opened on its grounds. Every day, the bodies of prisoners who were murdered or died of disease, hunger, or exhaustion were burned in 3 furnaces. However, as early as 1941, at the orders of Commandant Rudolf Hess, one of the rooms was converted into a gas chamber. Initially, mainly Soviet prisoners of war were murdered here with the lethal gas Zyklon B. Then, the first transports of Jews. According to the preserved unique documents, the first crematorium in Auschwitz reached a combustion capacity of 340 bodies per day. But it soon turned out that was not nearly enough. When mass shipments began to arrive, they have to find new solutions. Then Birkenau appears as the place of death. Auschwitz II-Birkenau, a gigantic new camp located about 1 mile from the main camp. The largest Nazi death factory in history. But murder on an industrial scale begins with cheap and primitive solutions. Commander Hess gives orders to convert 2 rural huts, from which Polish families were evicted, into gas chambers. This is how the first and the second bunker are created. From the wall colors, they are commonly referred to as the Red House and the White House. The murder sites were kept strictly secret by the Germans. This is the only photo where the little White House was accidentally captured in the distance. However, historians have managed to trace the last path of Jewish children, women, and men on their way to their deaths.
Drzewa, które tu widzimy dookoła. Tak, no to nimi świadkowie.
The trees we see are silent witnesses to this tragedy. People destined to die were transported here directly from the ramp by trucks to the northeastern part of the camp. Here, where the so-called Sperrgebiet was, where the exclusion zone was, a very little-known name, but very significant. Then they had to walk along the forest road, the so-called Waldweg, towards Bunker 2, the Little White House. The historical photo clearly shows the road taken by the victims to the Little White House, to their death. Even today, it is revealed by the current arrangement of trees along which the victims went. A Polish prisoner, Krystyna Zawulska, was a witness to the last moments of one of the Jewish transports.
From the ramp, the transport headed directly for the Little White House. A little fur-haired girl crouched down to pick a flower. An assessment became furious. He approached the child, not older than 4, and delivered her a strong kick. The little person fell down and sat amazed on the grass. She didn't cry. She was holding tight the stem, detached from the flower.
Last 100 meters of illusions, last 100 meters of the victims' lives. Before being directed to the gas chamber, everyone had to undress here. At the beginning, in the open air. Later, wooden barracks and undressing rooms were set up here. At first 2, then 1 more. Jews were lied to that after a long and tiring journey, they would bathe in a wash house and then be given food. But there were no real showers in the Little White House. There were 4 independent rooms serving as gas chambers inside this facility, all closed with special sealed wooden doors. People were crammed inside to the limit, each time even over 1,000 people. The cost of converting the hut into a gas chamber for mass and rapid murder was only 14,242 Reichsmarks. For comparison, 4 large gas chambers with crematoria, put into use in 1943, cost 100 times more.
Gaz, czyli granulat cyklonu.
The gas, the Zyklon B pellets, was introduced through small gas-tight windows positioned near the ceilings from the outside. Of course, these pellets were introduced by SS officers.
Cries and screams which didn't cease, now intensified. It might have lasted for 10, perhaps 12 minutes. Then, only dead silence.
Dead bodies were lying over there, jammed together, one upon another, so that they simply fell out and ended up near the door. We were so terrified that we became speechless. We had never seen such things before.
At first, the bodies of the gas victims were buried in mass graves. Soon, the exhumation of the bodies began. Near Bunker 2, special pits were dug, burn pits where the bodies were burned. One last time, let's take a look at an aerial photo from summer 1944. Next to the little white house, there are burn pits and heaps of ash from human bodies.
Sometimes, after entering the chamber, we heard someone's groans. Once, we found a baby wrapped in a pillow. We took the small bundle to Oberscharführer Moll. Moll took it to the verge of the pit and threw it into the fire.
Also, near the bunker, a concrete floor was made where unburned human bones were crushed. Later, these bone particles were sifted through sieves, loaded onto trucks heading towards the Vistula River, and there the ashes were dumped in the river. This way, the traces of this crime were destroyed. But the Germans did not manage to hide a murder on such a scale. And if there is a crime, there should also be a punishment. The original gallows were prepared especially for the execution of the Commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Hess. At the request of former prisoners, it was set up in this place, a symbolic place. Why? What is this place? Let's start this story from the beginning. Under the influence of his father, the pious Rudolf wanted to become a priest, a Catholic missionary in Africa. But his fate took a completely different course. At the age of 39, he was given the task of establishing the Auschwitz camp. He had no doubts. As he himself claimed, it was an honor.
He was driven by ambition after having been assigned to this task. The camp was to be arranged in such a way that it should remain there for decades. Hess accepted thoughtlessly all orders coming from Berlin. First of all, in Auschwitz, he started to elaborate plans of mass extermination of Jews. Hess was also the initiator of building extremely expensive, huge crematories and new gas chambers, which started to appear at Birkenau from 1942 onwards.
The chair on which Rudolf Hess, the reliable administrator of the death factory, worked has been preserved to this day. In this chair, he gave criminal orders. It's hard to believe, but the revenge of the victims could have reached him even during the war. Here is a fragment of the memories of the Polish prisoner.
My hair clipper was packed. The razor was sharpened. And then I was taken to Hess's villa. I stood at attention. He said only, "Kein Wort," "Don't speak a word," and sat down on the chair. I was terribly frightened. First, I shaved the hair above the ears, and other hair was smoothed with the hair clipper. I thanked and went out.
After the war, the former prisoner was often asked why, while holding the razor around the commander's neck, he hadn't cut the throat of this criminal. And he answered very simply, because I was afraid. I was afraid that someone even worse would come to replace him.
From the crematorium number 1 chimney rose tarry smoke from the burning bodies. A sweet, nauseating scent lingered over the countryside for kilometers around. But because of the high chimney, it rarely reached the Commandant's and his family's villas.
He lived with premises of KL Auschwitz with all his family, or directly at the camp area, in a villa with the interior altered at his wish, or rather his wife's Hedwig's wish.
A Polish family living here was evicted from the villa. Rudolf's wife loved luxury. And thanks to the slave labor of the prisoners and goods stolen from the Jewish victims, the Hess couple and their 5 children had plenty of everything, and they had everything for free. Rudolf's wife used to say, "I want to live and die here. Nowhere will I be like here."
We are in the private part of the Hess garden, the part where Hedwiga and her children spent a lot of their time during the war, living wealthy life. The garden was cultivated from imported plants, obtained from yards, guards and nurseries to which the SS staff had unlimited access. We watched Dutchman's pipe. This is one of the plants remembering this camp in the height of its infamy. It is crucial to remember that the garden was purposefully isolated and cut out from the tragic reality of the life in the camp. The life of cruelty, personal tragedies, hunger and death.
What was happening in that garden? What was the life of Hess, his wife, and their children? Janina Szczurek's account is an extraordinary document. As a young girl from the vicinity of Auschwitz, she had to work in the Commandant's villa.
The children of Hess, except Klaus, the oldest one, didn't hurt the prisoners working there. They were running all over the garden, looking at the prisoners who were working. They once came to me, asking me to sew for them some stripes with marks, like those worn by the prisoners. I wasn't aware of possible consequences. Klaus put on a couple band on the clothes of other kids. I sewed colorful triangles. The children were satisfied, and while running in the garden, they met their father, who tore off those marks and brought them home. I wasn't punished, but only forbidden to do it again.
After the war, Rudolf Hess was tracked down by the British. Released to the Poles, he stood before the Supreme National Tribunal in Warsaw. It's April 16th, 1947. Former prisoners of Auschwitz demanded to perform the execution in this place. Here, the barracks of the Politische Abteilung, which was the political department, stood. The Center for Managing the Extermination of Jews operated from here. Prisoners were brutally tortured here. Former prisoner Stanislav Hess remembered Hess's last moments this way.
I was standing nearby, perhaps a few meters from the gallows. I thought that this Hess, who was such a fervent Hitlerite, would throw out a catchword, but nothing of this kind. The sentence was read out calmly to him.
Hess was hanged at 8 minutes past 10, but next to the dead commander in the photo, you can see another figure that doesn't seem to fit here.
It is significant that just before his death, he decided to meet with a Catholic priest to go to confession and return to the bosom of a church.
Has the criminal responsible for the death of over 1 million innocent people received absolution? Probably yes, but it's hard to be 100% sure. Because in the Catholic Church, confession is strictly confidential. There are many facts in the history of Auschwitz-Birkenau that simply cannot be explained. For example, there was a certain group of deportees who did not pass the selection on the ramp and did not go straight to the gas chambers. They also missed the brutal procedure of admission to the labor camp.
Gypsies would arrive at the camp with all they had. Nothing was taken away from them. In the camp, they were walking in their own clothes. They didn't have their hair cut. There were many gypsy carts standing on the camp premises.
But these were only appearances.
According to Himmler's decision, the camp at Birkenau was to become the place for deporting European Sinti and Roma as well. There had been acknowledged by the Nazis as an antisocial, socially awkward group that should disappear from the German and the Nazi European society.
Between the spring of 1943 and the summer of 1944, the Germans deported around 21,000 Sinti and Roma here. The section marked as B2E became Zigeunerlager, a Roma camp. At first glance, it was no different from the rest of the Birkenau camp. 30 primitive wooden barracks standing in 2 rows. However, it was a special camp. Whole families were placed there, men, women, children. Among them, also grandparents, aunts. Often whole large clans stayed there together. But it doesn't stop there. In the 2 outer barracks marked with numbers 29 and 31, a kindergarten was created, a nursery and kindergarten. Children played and learned there from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m.
The barrack interior was painted, adorned with drawings from the fairy tales for children. Behind the barrack, there was even kind of playground. There were swings and carousels.
You could hear the children laughing and their loud chatter. Even music could be heard from the family camp, because the Roma kept their instruments. Sometimes they used to play in the afternoons or evenings, which was also unusual in the camp conditions. However, the crazy racial ideology the Germans believed in treats Sinti and Roma just like Jews, just like subhumans, worms to be exterminated. In fact, the conditions in the Zigeunerlager are devastating.
First of all, it was a construction area. Not all the buildings were completed yet. There were no sanitary facilities, nor there was any water supply system.
Deadly diseases rage among the Sinti and Roma. Here is an account of a prisoner who was a doctor in the Roma camp.
Sick gypsy women were lying on the bunks, arranged in groups of a few at a time, resting on one bunk. At some distance, kids were lying. There were always 100 to 150 of them. No clothes at all, no baby stops, completely nude, kids were always crying. They were in the grip of scarlet fever, gangrene, cancers, venereal diseases, Lewis, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, whooping cough, diphtheria, measles. I found those moments most difficult for me. Not beatings, not hearing noises, but those kids.
They were lodged in such horrible sanitary conditions that they simply died standing up. This is something unique. This is something specific of this group, the great drama of the Romani people.
There is also a terrible truth behind the beautiful Romani portraits painted by the Jewish prisoner Dina Gotlipova. Let's listen to a fragment of her memories.
First, I painted a very beautiful girl. I don't remember her name. Then I asked another one named Céline. She was French and she had a distant look in her eyes. A short time before, she had lost her baby. She didn't have breast milk to feed it, and the baby died of hunger.
Dina Gotlipova had to paint these realistic portraits at the behest of an SS doctor, Josef Mengele, known as the Angel of Death. They documented his pseudoscientists' experiments and research carried out on male and female prisoners. The SS man believed that, thanks to Dina's talent, the portraits were better than photographs. On the back of one of them, there is shocking evidence, a thorough study of the human eyes that interested Dr. Mengele.
Color differences of the iris is a very rare case. These prisoners were first killed, and then their eyeballs were sent for Germany for further research.
To those Sinti and Roma who managed to survive the long months in the camp hell, a terrible fate awaited anyway. It is August 2nd, 1944. Dusk. Amid the screams, beatings, and children crying, the liquidation of the remnants of the Roma camp begins. The Germans murder 4,000 people in one night.
7 priceless portraits by Dina Gottlieb are left after the Zigeunerlager and the murdered Sinti and the Roms. She survived, and amazingly, after the war she worked as a cartoonist, among others for Disney and Warner Bros. She co-created characters such as Tweety the Canary and Daffy the Duck. She was a strong and independent woman. She finally removed the number from her forearm. She has never given up, never let herself be sucked into the depth of camp hell.
But in the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, there is another portrait behind which hides a touching story of a great friendship. This portrait is unlike any other. 2 men share identical first and last names, Tomasz Serafiński. But only one is actually called that name. For the other, it is just a false identity under which he carries out the most dangerous intelligence mission of the Second World War. His real name is Witold Pilecki.
Witold Pilecki spent 947 long days in hell and deliberately risked his own life.
On September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany attacks Poland. The Second World War begins. On September 17th, the Soviet Union, allied with Hitler, strikes from the east. Cavalry commanded by Captain Pilecki destroys 7 German tanks. Poles are fighting bravely, but they have no chance. However, they are not going to give up. Pilecki goes underground.
In August 1940, the wave of German terror is already exceptionally dangerous. People disappear, and it was time to make a decision by checking the facts. And it was Pilecki who was assigned this task.
It's September 19th, 1940. Occupied Warsaw, sunrise. Suddenly, trucks and hundreds of armed Germans appear on the streets. They drag defenseless men out from their apartments. Pilecki could easily hide, but he does not hesitate even for a fraction of a second. He allows himself to be arrested voluntarily.
To call Pilecki's deed heroism is to say nothing. When he got arrested in Warsaw, he had no guarantee that he would be sent to Auschwitz. On the same day, the Germans could have shot him down somewhere in the streets or in the woods near Warsaw. Pilecki simply dared to jump into absolute darkness.
But luck favors the brave. Pilecki, along with several thousand men, is taken to a transport going straight to KL Auschwitz. Let's listen to an excerpt from his report.
About 10 p.m., the train stopped at a certain place. You could hear shouts, screams, opening the rail cars and baying dogs. In my recollections, I would recall that place at the moment when I was leaving all that used to be on the earth and started something that must have been somewhere outside it. We were approaching a gate fitted in a fence made of wires with an inscription Arbeit macht frei placed on it. Only then did we learn to understand it correctly.
To avoid exposing his family and friends in a clandestine time, Witold Pilecki took the name of Tomasz Serafiński, a person whose documents he had already received. And under such a name, he was registered in Auschwitz.
The real Serafiński has no idea that another man is using his first and last name. Meanwhile, Pilecki quickly manages to shake off the first shock. He begins to build a camp resistance movement. The idea is ingeniously simple. Underground prisoners operate as so-called fives. Each five is independent and self-reliant. And one five doesn't know any other five. If one conspirator fails, only 4 people are at risk, not the entire organization.
Eventually, he managed to establish contacts with the external world and to ensure that information from Auschwitz will reach the Polish resistance movement on a regular basis, which is, in my opinion, the greatest achievement of Witold Pilecki's organization in Auschwitz.
From 1942, the extermination of Jews begins in Auschwitz. Pilecki becomes a witness to murder on a scale previously unknown in the history of mankind.
The alarming news about the Holocaust flowed from occupied Poland to the civilian and military Allied authorities almost from the very beginning. The answer was poor. Why? The Allies had a different logic. They said, first, let's win the war. That will be the best help.
Many times in the camp, Pilecki himself was on the verge of death. It was only thanks to other prisoners that he had survived illness. This is how he recalled the moment when he finally decided to escape in 1943.
I have been here for 2 years and 7 months. Recently, I haven't been given any orders. Germans have taken away the best people with whom I worked. It's no use staying here any longer. So I am getting out.
Pilecki succeeded in being transferred with other 2 prisoners to a work squad that was employed in a mill situated approximately 1 kilometer from the camp. He managed to make new keys and open the door, and taking advantage of the SS man in attention, he continued his escape, heading eastwards.
In Nowy Wiśnic, Pilecki is to receive help from a conspirator operating there. He doesn't even know what a surprise awaits him.
On the veranda of a little house, there was a gentleman sitting. I introduced myself by using the name I used in Oświęcim. The gentleman almost jumped to his feet. How come, sir? Those are my personal data. Yes. But I have survived with them considerably longer than you have. We embraced cordially and became friends.
A reminder of this unusual meeting is a double portrait painted that summer in Wiśnic. On its reverse, there are the signatures of Tomasz Serafiński and Witold Pilecki, along with the dates of Pilecki's imprisonment. After almost 80 years, Tomasz's daughter donated the portrait to the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum.
Today we got to know the history of 3 people who were extremely important to the history of Auschwitz. We do not know who the author of the sketchbook was, a prisoner or an SS man, but in both cases he risked a lot, documenting the Holocaust. Rudolf Hess, in his youth, dreamed of being a missionary, but he became a criminal. He did the most terrible, evil things without hesitating. He only started to think when he himself stood in front of death. Witold Pilecki allowed himself to be arrested voluntarily and put his own life at stake, to document evil and to resist evil. What is the lesson of these 3 stories? No matter who you are, no matter what circumstances you find yourself in, you always have a choice.